everybody, my name's Lisa. I'm an employment advisor based in Halifax. We're putting together a series of films based around employability. This first one is going to be about CVs, and I'm here with my colleague Felecha, who is also an employment advisor on our Hopeful Families project. And we really just want to talk to you about CVs, some of the pitfalls people have, and just really how to put together a good CV for when you're applying for work. Felecha?
Hi, my name's Felecha and I work with Lisa. I'm an employment advisor and skills trainer and deliver sessions to help people understanding how to put together CVs and cover letters and all the other basics that we're going to be covering in our clips.
So later on, we'll be showing you some practical tips on a CV using the computer. So you'll see that on your screen. But firstly, Felecha and I are just going to have a bit of a natter about CVs in general and some of the things that we come across as employment advisors that might sort of be preventing you from getting to the next stage for that job, basically. I mean, one of the things that I come across firstly is that people put information on their CVs that they probably shouldn't be putting on there. What do you think, Felecha?
Yeah, with the CVs, I think it's one of the basic tools that you need for any job search now, and it is really important that the information on there captures the right information. So there are quite a lot of things that people put on that are not necessary to go on the CV, particularly in that personal information section.
I think things like date of birth definitely doesn't need to be on a CV. Maybe back in the 90s, people used to put the date of birth, national insurance number, all of these things. That really doesn't need to be on there. You stick to your name, address, telephone number, email address. If you want to, you could, I suppose, people could put their social media, like LinkedIn account on there, in particular, probably not Facebook. But they could look at sort of the more professional platforms, if they wanted to advertise themselves to an employer in that way. So yeah, personal data is definitely sort of one of the biggest pitfalls I find that people fall down with a CV, definitely.
Yeah, and also just looking at the email address, it is making sure that you have an appropriate email address. So something that is just very simple, probably linked around your name and not anything that, I don't know, throws in anything that shouldn't really be there as part of the email address.
Over the years, I think I've seen some really bizarre email addresses on CVs. And just remembering, I suppose, that when an employer gets your CV, they might actually start looking you up online. So, linking to that, make sure your email address is appropriate. Make sure that your social media accounts are appropriate as well, because a lot of employers these days, they do sort of scout you out before they sort of look to bring you in for interview. So that's a really good point. Yeah, definitely.
And that might mean it's necessary to have two email addresses, one that is just linked for job search purposes and then one that's for your other things if necessary.
Yeah, that's a really good point, definitely.
And making sure that your email address and contact details is up to date, actually, because that's a big thing that I work with a lot of people that have a CV and they may not have looked at it for some time or may not have used it as regularly as they should. So people tend to sometimes change their contact numbers a lot or change email accounts a lot. So it's making sure that it's the most up-to-date contact details that are on there.
Definitely. And then I think one of the other biggest things is that, and quite rightly, people get help with their CV, which is absolutely fine. That's what we've built our jobs on, haven't we, Felecha, is helping people as an initial point, putting a CV together. But some people don't learn what's in that CV. So they'll get given a CV and they've no idea what's in it. So what's really important, I feel, is that, particularly for me as an employment advisor, is that I sit with that person and we build that CV together. So that person is putting their information into it and their experience rather than me dictating to them what goes into it, because it's remembering that your CV is what gets you to that interview. So if you can't talk about what's in your CV, you're going to find that a real struggle once you get to interview stage.
Yeah.
So definitely. I think the other thing as well is personal statements. The personal profile at the top of the CV can be a bit of a cut and paste job at times from the internet. I don't know if you found that, Felecha, but certainly for me, the amounts of times, I've seen the same personal profile on a CV for people. So make that really individual to yourself as well. I think that's quite important.
I would say just a little story that I used to work in recruitment, and my job was to filter through all the CVs to match people up for jobs. And I can remember a time that I think I read 25 personal statements in a row, and they all said, hardworking, reliable individual that can work as part of a team or on my own. So when you're saying about making it individually, that's really important. And just to have one there as well, because some people think that it's not necessary to have a personal statement, but that is the introduction to you, and that is the bit that captures the employer's interest and can kind of relate you to the job that you're going for. So it is really important to, out of everything else in the CV, to spend the most time to make sure that that personal statement is right and reflects the skills that are relevant to the job.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point with the relevance as well, because you can tweak that.
Yeah.
So some people are looking for different types of jobs, so they might have 2 or 3 different CVs, which sort of make them match better to some of the other different jobs out there. So your personal profile could be based around customer service if you're looking for retail, and then you might have another CV where the personal profile is based around something like manual work and being organised and whatever else, if you're also interested in some factory work, for example. So you can tweak it, I think, as you want as well. So yeah, CVs.
So yeah, if we're talking about the work history or employment history, career history, it doesn't matter which one you use. Well, I don't find that it matters. I think it's just whatever you prefer. I think I always put employment history. But there's definitely a few bits to consider within that. So in terms of what details need to go in there. So it's really important to have the dates that you worked. Now, dates are really funny because some people just put the month and year. Some people put the actual day, the month and the year. I would say at least definitely the months and the years that you worked, because you can either be selling yourself short on a job. So if you put 2002 to 2003, that could be a 2-year period, but it could also be a 1-2 week period if it's at the end of the year to the beginning of the new year. And it is also important to put dates on. I think some people have been advised that if you don't have dates, particularly if you've not worked in a job too long, or if you've got really big gaps, it's a way of disguising that. But the first thing an employer would look at when they see that is, what are you trying to hide because you've not put the dates on there?
It's a really good point with CVs. I mean, personally, I don't like them as part of a recruitment process. I'm a recruiting manager and we don't use CVs. I think an application form is a much better way of getting an idea of somebody. But, there are jobs out there that still receive CVs. So you must plug the gaps on your CV, because what you've got to remember, I think, is that CV is going to a person. That employer is a person, and that person doesn't know you. It's not personal, it's business at the end of the day, and they will make a judgment based on that bit of paper. So you're absolutely right, Felecha. I think, don't make it, try and plug gaps, with it, because they will. They'll notice, they'll look at it and go, but what have they been doing there? And it would be something absolutely innocent, but they could be assuming all sorts. And it might be that doesn't get you through to the next stage. So being as honest as possible, I think, on a CV, without giving too much personal information away is really important as well. It's getting the right balance, I think, isn't it? So, it's a really good point.
Yeah. And also with dates, don't try and tweak or over tweak your dates. I know it's hard to remember sometimes. So what I try and get people to do is think about, think about what happened in that year, and then think, did I start that job? Was it summertime? Was it wintertime? Was it the beginning of the year? So if you can't remember exactly, at least you've got as close as possible to when it did happen. If you can think about, it was just after my son's birthday or before this particular thing happened. But definitely to make sure that the dates are on there and not to lie about them, because it's really clear on a CV when someone has fudged their dates because things don't add up, and it stands out really easily to someone that's used to looking at CVs if people have tried to mess about with their dates to either make something appear longer or
and again,
cover something over.
assumptions about what you've been doing in that time and why have you fudged it. So it's I do think it's important to get that bit right as well. But I think the thing with dates as well is, don't go too far back as well. Don't be putting your YTS scheme from the 70s in there. I don't really think that's relevant now. Looking at sort of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, when I generally do sessions, I say, go back 10 years. The only way I always say, if you go back more than 10 years, it's because you might have done your last job for a period of time, and then the job before that takes you back even longer. So don't miss that job off. If that takes you back 15, 20 years, keep that on there. If you've done quite a lot within the 10 years, then put that on there. But generally a 10-year rule. And
then some people might have had the same job for 20 years. So obviously that goes as a good solid work history on your CV,
But people sometimes ask, well, if I've done that job for 20 years, do I just put that one job, or would I put a few more just to show that I have done other things? What would you?
Well, I would say keep it to the 2 pages. We do have a 2-page rule with CVs, and if you've worked in one job for 20 years, I would probably put your last couple of jobs before that, so that you've got a nice, good, solid work history there. If you've had quite a few jobs over the years, like, for example, I started at 16 in retail, so I wouldn't now put that on my CV. 20 years ago I would have done, but now it's not relevant to the type of role I'm looking for, and also it's a very, very long time ago. So I wouldn't go right back to the start of my career history. So I would be looking at the last, say, probably 15 years of my role, for example. So I suppose there are instances where you do need to look at your own career history and look at what's appropriate to put on your CV.
Also, when we're doing within your employment history, so we talked about dates, but then also it's things that I've noticed through the years, but looking at CVs that people have missing. So sometimes people don't always put their job title on. That's important to put within there, your job title and also your employer, where you've worked. Some people put the location. I never put the location. I feel like I don't know what you think, but I feel like if you've worked in retail in a store, it's retail, whether it's up north or down south. So I don't put the location. I'm not sure that really is significant to what you've actually done as part of the role. So just making sure that you have your job title, where you've worked, and then details with what you've done for your job. So what I always find again with people is when they tell you what they do about the role, they put a lot of detail in. Well, I did this, and they give you the general what they've done, but then all the little extra bits that are not necessarily maybe as part of the job title that people do, they put those details in. But they miss it off the CV. So when it's the CV, it's just keeping it very basic, as in, these are my general job roles, but they may have done lots of other additional things that are useful skills to maybe the job that they're going for or other areas of work, but they don't include that detail. So maybe not being too, not putting in every minor role, but there are things that you do outside of your job role, particularly that people have to be more flexible now. So if that's going to help you go into that new job, then making sure that you're detailing them extra duties.
Definitely. And then I'm thinking hobbies and interests.
Hobbies and interests?
Yeah, that's an interesting one on a CV. I've seen some CVs with a full page of hobbies and interests, which is always quite amusing, but keep it short is what I would say. If you do want to put it on there, I don't think it's as essential as it used to be, but if you do want to put it on there, particularly if it's quite relevant to the job that you're applying for as well, if you like playing football and you're keeping fit and things like that, and the role that you're applying for needs you to be, fit, manual handling, for example, it might be quite relevant for that. But do keep it to, I would say, sort of 2 or 3 lines.
Yeah. And maybe avoid the one that tends to get overused a lot, which is socialising with friends and family.
We're not allowed to do that
anymore. We're not allowed to do that now. This is pre-pandemic. That there was a lot of CVs that was socialising with friends and family, and I think if you do something that's quite active or crafty, or that can maybe be, like you said, useful within your job, that's great to have on there. And then also don't put anything that might reflect negatively in terms of what an employer is maybe wanting from you. So I've had someone that put on their hobbies and interests that there was a really big football supporter of a particular team, and they'd never ever missed a match which is not good because that employer might then think, well, if there's a weekend match and I need you to do weekends, are you going to be available? Don't ever put your football team down or any teams that you support, because that might be the one that the employer absolutely hates, and that might be that little tipping point that gets you the job or not gets you the job. So
never show your colours on your CV.
And don't lie on your interests and hobbies, because my first CV, I wanted to seem like I was very, I did a lot of things which I didn't at the time. So I put that I liked travelling and put these 2 particular places. And at the interview, the employer did ask me about one of these places that I'd supposedly visited. And I didn't have much to say. So if you do something, great. But if you don't put it on there.
Really, really good point. Actually, again, linking it to that interview, when you're sending a CV to an employer, you're applying for that job. You could get to sit in front of that employer and answer questions about your CV. So you're absolutely right. Just as much as you wouldn't lie about your employment history, don't add any frills for your hobbies and interests as well, because you might just find that employer has a similar interest to you and want to engage in conversation about it. So yeah, definitely. It's a bit of a faux pas. So
what about references?
Now,
so for me, when it comes to references, I would always put available on request.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. Yeah, so this is interesting with references, because I think it is a personal preference. Now, I advise people to put the referees on their CV, and it's because for me it's almost like you're showing you've nothing to hide. You're saying to that employer up front, if you want to, you can approach my referees and find out a little bit more about me. I also think that the available on request thing, just in my opinion, is just, again, it's just a bit too copy and paste. It's like, everybody puts that on the CV. By showing that you're actually willing for that employer to approach your referees, I do think it shows a more openness, that you've got nothing to hide. Again, remember that employer doesn't know you. They're making a judgment call on that bit of paper. So it's trying to sort of look at every way you can with that bit of paper to demonstrate that you are open and nothing to hide. And you're very welcome to approach my references. That's the way I look at it anyway.
I'm very opposite. So I think the reason I always put available on request, and again, it's 2 reasons. One is that, and I suppose it goes against what you're saying, that putting them on there means that employer can just contact your references, which is, very open and honest. But for a lot of people that are doing a lot of job search and sending to a lot of places, you are then putting that contact out there for anybody that sees your CV to take up that reference before you even know if they're interested in you for the role. So I think that saying available on request gives you that opportunity to contact your referees, which you should always do. Always contact them and let them know that, I put you down as a I'd like to use you as a referee. And that will obviously make them aware that they may be getting contacted, but also for you to get a really good idea of what type of reference they're going to provide. So they may say no, or you get a sense that it might not necessarily be a positive one, then you know not to use them.
But you do find, Felecha, that a lot of employers won't go there at that point in the recruitment process. They'll only approach that referee when you've reached that moment in recruitment. So as an employer ourselves, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't be ringing that person. But you might find some of the smaller companies might want to do that. But 9 times out of 10, a lot of employers don't bother anyway. It's more a psychological thing that you're actually just saying, I'm happy with this. But again, I think it's just personal preference, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think people then, you can kind of make up whichever way you prefer to do. So I don't think neither of them is negative. But then it also gives you a little bit of an extra that if they do contact you for a reference, then you already know, maybe if they do it beforehand, you know that they might have an interest if they say, can we take your references? So I think there's positives
pros and cons.
To both sides. First disagreement, lovely.
Yes, we will have to agree to disagree on that.
We'll take a public vote on that. We'll see what people think.
Let's not. No.
Okay.
So I suppose the last thing about CVs is obviously the education and training, isn't it? And for me, it's making sure that you've got all the relevant things on there. And I think relevance seems to be a theme sort of running out this conversation, doesn't it? But for example, if you've done a course and it's something like employability, you might not necessarily want to put that on your CV. This is my personal view. And again, because the employer doesn't know you, you don't want that employer making assumptions about you. So you don't want that employer thinking, well, why do they need to do an employability course? What's all that about? So generally, I tend to stick to the accredited things, the things that are relevant to the job that you're applying for, the qualifications that you've gained, obviously your GCSEs, your A-levels, your degrees, whatever else that you might have done during statutory education. And then things that are relevant, like safeguarding, for example, health and safety, food hygiene, all of those things that are really relevant and work-based. I would probably stick to those kind of things.
Yeah, I would probably say the same. I always say, if it's more of a course that's personal to you and your personal development, then I would keep that off. So your confidence building, your employability skills, anything that could be useful either to that job directly or, in terms of your transferable skills, customer service, things like that, I would put on there. Yeah. High school education is a big one that people question me about. So one of the questions is, what if I don't have any GCSEs? What do I put on my CV? So we might disagree again. I always say at least put educated to GCSE standard. I wouldn't leave it blank, because I feel that whether your grades are really good or not, you've been through that process of year 7 to year 10, and within that you will have learned a lot, regardless of what skill, what grade you've come out with at the end. So I think it shows that you've kind of been through that process of learning, regardless of the skill. And if you leave it blank, it, again, like you said about throwing up questions, it could throw up that question, well, did that person even go to high school at all? And if not, why not?
Yeah. And if you've attended school, you've attended school. Yeah. So I would absolutely agree. I think you put on the fact that you've attended school, the school you've been to, maybe the years that you were there. If you've, say, for example, you've done 8 GCSEs and you got grade Fs in everything, you might want to put, 8 GCSEs, because you've still got those GCSEs. You just haven't got that, golden C or above in maths and English. Because I do feel that when employers are recruiting, it's not the be all and end all, for that person to have a GCSE grade A level, English or maths or whatever. A lot of employers actually these days, more so these days, are looking for personality, for their jobs. They're looking for people to fit in. They're looking for reliability. They're looking for those transferable skills, which is partly why I don't really like CVs, to be honest, because I think that they don't really sell that person the best. So when you get to the stage where you're actually having a chat with that employer, it's at that point where you can talk about, sort of your history with your education and whatever else, and you can have that open conversation with them, because your personality will come through then, rather than it just being a piece of paper and that those assumptions being made.